Hello, Dr. Maxwell. Thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well on the West Coast.
Yes. How's the weather wherever you are? Are you in LA?
Yes, yeah, I'm in Los Angeles. It was really warm yesterday. It's cooling down a little bit today, but it's still, I think, in the 70s. So,
Yeah, we take a punishment up here in the high desert. We're about,
yeah,
I think we're about 2.5 hours, 2 hours from from Las Vegas,
ooh,
off the
that's hot.
15.
I like the desert.
You've been?
Yeah, yeah. Frequently going to Joshua Tree, and my partner, his business is in Vegas, so we go over there pretty frequently as well.
When you're taking a break from your clinical psychology?
Yes.
Where do you practice?
So I'm at one of the academic medical centers in Los Angeles. It's one of the larger ones. And I also have a private practice with a neurologist in LA. And I also have my own private practice, but my specific one is mostly therapy.
Mm-hmm. And that's neuropsychology, right?
Yes, yeah. So the study of brain and behavior. So most of the time, my job is to assess for cognitive change related to different disease
Mm-hmm.
processes and assess whether somebody could benefit from rehab, if they've had like a stroke or a brain injury, and how to benefit or if they can benefit from psychotherapy
Mm-hmm.
for terminal or chronic illnesses as well.
Mm-hmm. Such as nervous system diseases.
Exactly, exactly.
What made you to choose to do that?
Well, I actually went into clinical psychology to do trauma work.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to work with individuals with PTSD, which I did do, and that is a specialty of mine as well. I worked with veterans for quite a
Mm-hmm.
while, but I had a supervisor who was a neuropsychologist during my PhD program, and I kind of just found the field fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I found assessment fascinating, and I just dove right in. And then I continued to dive in, and it's been a long journey, but I'm still going.
What was it like writing your dissertation?
Oh man, long. I look back at it
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of a blur. Like I've looked at it a few times over the past few years
Mm-hmm.
when people have wanted to read it and I've sent it to them, and it almost feels like I didn't write it, even though I know I did. So that might be a little bit of PTSD right there. But yeah, that dissertation was a mixture of neuropsychology and PTSD work. I was looking at two different treatments for PTSD. One of them is memory specificity training,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is a well known treatment within the field, cognitive processing therapy. So I was seeing if they compared to each other, because memory specificity hasn't been done for PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Now it has since my study took place, but and then I was looking at whether or not there would be functional cognitive changes from those treatment models, which there were. So
Mm-hmm.
with emotionally processing information.
A lot of research, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
My formal education was in history, in the
Oh,
social
nice.
science, and a minor in computer science. I never went for my master's or PhD because I went off and decided I was good at personal training and fitness coaching, which has evolved into life coaching, which I find I can still put everything together still. But during the
Yeah.
pandemic, something interesting happened. I found that I had a passion for psychology, so I just dove right in.
There you go.
Dive right
And
the understatement.
what's up?
Oh, yeah?
Lucky enough
Why is that an
to-
understatement?
this man will be up at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning reading psychological books. It's an understatement.
Anyway, I particularly, since my formal education is in history, I kind of got enamored with the development and evolution of modern psychology. And I found that some of the classics are still applicable
Yeah,
to the
very much so.
discipline, especially when we take a look at the Janetian model of mental energy, which you're probably familiar with. And he claimed that there was holes in the energy when somebody had a disease in particular. And over the years, there's been a lot of analogies to electricity when it comes to mental energy. And you can just simply look up a YouTube video and see what too much electricity or current or voltage does to a circuit or a piece of equipment. And that can happen mentally too. Now, my question for you is, if somebody has a neuro disease and they're struggling with energy, what are some practical ways that an individual can manage their energy?
Yeah. This comes up a lot. One of the specialties I have is working within a particular clinic for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS,
Okay.
Lou Gehrig's disease. So that's a particular diagnosis that fatigue happens naturally in the system and increases as the disease goes on. But it also is applicable to many chronic illnesses. So I've talked with people with MS about this as well. The biggest thing I think for individuals suffering with fatigue issues and needing to conserve energy is that you have to learn very early on how to be your best advocate. You have to be the one that's going to say, I've had too much. I need a break. As the day progresses, you have to be able to say that to your partner. If you have people over, to be able to say, hey, I have a boundary. I can maybe talk for an hour or have you guys here, but then I'm going to be tired and I'm going to need to go to sleep. And learning how to do that is incredibly important. I mean, it's important for everybody, but it's even more important for individuals with chronic or terminal illness, because you want to use your energy how you want to use it. So you should be thinking always about, where should this be spent? Do I want to spend this with my family? Do I want to spend all my energy doing this task or that task? And also allowing people to do things for you, to get things off of your plate that maybe they're important in everyday life, but they're not important with quality of life. So if somebody else can do the laundry for you and they're willing and able, and that allows you to keep your energy to go have an enjoyable meal with someone and create a memory, that's important to me, at least. And I think it should be important to everybody, but advocating is probably one of the big pieces there that comes with having to figure out energy conservation.
Excellent. One of the things that I struggle with, which I think I've come to be able to manage, is traumatic reminiscence and fixed ideas. Is I agree with Carl Rogers that life is a flow of experience. I agree with his existential approach. Here's the problem that I'm having. I still struggle with, not to the degree that I used to. Here's my experience. And then all of a sudden, here comes my nerve disease. And within that moment. And then I have a fixed idea. And then I become hypersensitive to the moment. And then there's sometimes within the moment or the experience, there's a trauma attached to it.
Yeah.
So how do you unravel that? And what are some ways that individuals who are struggling with that can deal with that? Because I think over-observation or hypersensitivity, even victim sensitivity, can destroy the moment.
Very much. I think we, as a society, get very attached to identity. We have different identities in our life, in our lifetime. And what I've noticed, especially for chronic illness, terminal illness, is that the people that struggle the most with allowing the space for that identity to exist, but not take over, is learning and remembering all the other identities that they have. And that just because that is a piece of them doesn't mean that it's all of them. And that our identities change, and being okay with that. I used to be like an avid runner, but my knee kind of sucks now. And I can't really fit that identity as much as I want to anymore. But I have to learn to be okay with letting that go and creating some new identities, like being an avid reader or being an avid meditator or something that's not as physical. And remembering those pieces when that knee acts up or that chronic illness pops up, is remembering that this is a piece of me, but it's not all of me, and holding on to that. And then as you go through life, as you go through those times, those moments where that pops up, is figuring out, how can I center myself here and not allow it to take over the day, the week, the month, because it's a moment.
Right.
So whatever you're having to tell yourself, this is temporary. I have been here before. I know how to cope with this. These are the things in place that I can actively use to cope with this moment, to move through it rather than against it. I think it's really important.
Do you agree with the early philosophers, which I think were before the psychologists, and psychologists came from philosophy?
Yeah.
Do you believe that, according to Pierre Janet's term, subconscious, we'll use his language, do you think the subconscious knows disease?
I think so. I think, I'm reading a book right now called Sound Medicine by a neurologist, Colry Chaudhry, is her name. And she talks about how we're all so connected on an energy level through sound waves and understanding that piece of it. And I think that's the level that you're speaking to, is that disease knows something is wrong on these levels that we cannot really see as well. And you can even look at that like with, I can't remember the specific name of it, but it's a treatment that they're using now that uses like I think it's very low hertz sound waves to break gallbladder and kidney stones. So on that level, that like very low level hertz of sound is aware something's wrong in our body and is breaking it, is able to break it. And we can't see that. We can't see that level of sound. We've created it, but we're not able to see that piece. And so subconsciously, I think that's kind of what we're speaking to, is this level that we don't have access to completely. But we're learning how to have access to it.
I think at the lowest levels is, in regards to our perception, the reflective part of our subconscious. For example, if we were walking down a sidewalk and we heard a car crash, we would respond to that. We wouldn't keep walking, because we want to avoid biological catastrophe.
Yeah.
And I think, and I know because I have an endogenic issue within me, which kind of creates those psychogenic situations in my life, is that my perception seems to be off. or distorted. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, that comes with trauma. You know, when we have a traumatic event of any kind, who we are and how we learn to adapt through that is always going to be with us. And so we have to figure out how to create space for the trauma and how to go with it rather than against it, like I said earlier. But, you know, that takes practice, and it takes a lot of exposure, and it also takes a lot of guts to move through that rather than avoid, because we can avoid lots of things in our life that are traumatic. If we get in a car accident, we can say, that's it, I never want to drive ever again. But that's not what's going it's not what is going to help us in the end, because we're running from our problem rather than saying, how can I incorporate this, move through it, and remind myself of all of the times I've gotten in a vehicle and not gotten in an accident? How can I hold on to that piece of my identity that still is there as well?
Right. What about repeated trauma of the same nature? For example, DO3 and I live with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which is a progressive condition.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm going through the grieving phase over and over and over again at different parts of my life, if that makes sense. And I'm tired of that.
So you can't get.
I don't blame you.
But I've learned, mostly through self-development and personal development, that I can handle it. But how does somebody deal with repeated trauma that just keeps coming the same way?
Yeah. Perspective is everything with that. If you can understand that most of life is perspective, I mean, that's how we move through and figure things out. I've watched people that have very interesting perspectives on their illnesses and really struggle with it, all the way up until they're dying in the process, in hospice, still struggling to just lean in rather than lean out of what's going on, and reminding them of all of the things that they've gone through in the past that have shown their strength and who they are and their character. But you mentioned it just now. You know, you've seen yourself go through it previously, which gives you the strength when it comes up again to say, I've already suffered, I can do this. And I think that's how a lot of people with complex PTSD that stems from like childhood, that's how a lot of them make sense of the situation, is like, I have gone through so much already, bring it on. Nothing's going to like deter me. I'm keeping my focus on the present moment, the beauty, the gratitude of the day, all of the pieces when things are working, and I'm ready for more suffering because that's life.
I love the existential viewpoint.
I mean, that's how I conceptualize everything personally, is like, life is suffering. If you can learn to accept that and understand that you're going to have to adapt to that whenever it happens, rather than run from it and see it as like a growth experience, because it always is.
Exactly.
Like, you're going to be way better off.
Now, Carl Jung, you're probably familiar with him. I'm sure every psychological student is familiar with that man. Is he put forth the idea of the persona. And I see that in life. I find with individuals with chronic illnesses, they deliberately and knowingly put on a persona. It's not like they're not aware of it. Like Carl Jung claimed that Jung claimed that sometimes people are not aware that they keep this mask on, and it causes all kinds of things that go on. It leads to neurosis, they called it. But someone with a chronic illness, such as myself and others have told me, that they put on a mask, such as in a social situation, they present themselves as somebody that's strong or somebody that's not tired when they really are. When someone is in pain, but they put on a mask to show that they're not. I mean, is that psychologically damaging, you think, or is it okay to do that?
I think it's just like everything in life, it depends. But I think it depends on how often you're doing it and the reasoning behind it. I mean, we all have masks that we wear in our lives and in different situations. I sometimes get uncomfortable in a large social situation, but I hold it in and keep it together because I remind myself it's temporary and I want to be there, kind of thing. And I think that that's kind of when it's appropriate is, am I wearing this mask because I want to be in this environment with these people and I want to connect, I want to shift my focus onto some normalcy, some presentness? Or am I wearing this mask because I don't want to confront how difficult this is and let people in and be vulnerable with myself and process that piece? I think if you're wearing a mask, you better be also processing the reasonings why you're wearing that mask if you're doing it too often, because to hold all of that in is very destructive. And the level of anxiety and depression that can come from that can only increase inflammation with disease. If we're constantly anxious or we're constantly in pain and we're not expressing it, we're not doing something to move through it and let people help us and be there for us, even if they can't do anything, we're going to be worse off in the end.
And there are situations that arise that trigger insecurities, like Adlerian thought. Adlerian? No, I'll just call him Adler. I won't try to say the other term. Feeling inferior in social situation, his individual psychology, where he talked about the inferiority and the superiority. With someone with a chronic illness, I think that it goes deeper, because I know years ago in my situation and others I've talked to, is when they're getting into a social situation, and even within their families at times, they feel worthless or inferior. And they think that people are better than them. And they begin to blame their disability. So what do you think's going on there?
It's hard to become dependent on other people. As a society, as a culture, in America especially, the attitude is be independent as long as you can, rely on yourself, and when that script is flipped because of some kind of illness where we're needing somebody to do something for us in the moment or for a while, or our life is completely changed and somebody has to take over something for the rest of our life, that can be incredibly difficult because you do feel inferior. You're having to give up control. And I think there's lots of people that have anger towards their illnesses because of that. And I think our brain naturally wants to blame something. That's what our brain is trying to do. We're trying to blame. We're coming up with a reason why this is happening. And so we're blaming the disease process for our emotional state. But that only is drinking more poison. I mean, when we're sitting there angry at our circumstance and saying, why me? Or, I was a good person. I hear that a lot. I was a good person. I did everything right. And like, why did I have to get this disease process or whatever's going on? And that's another part of our society that is a difficult thing for people to wrap their minds around, because we're frequently taught as children, good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. But that's not the case. And as an adult, having to unravel that takes a lot of time and understanding, so that you're not blaming yourself, you're not blaming the disease, and you're just seeing it as part of your circumstance, part of your world, putting it on a shelf and reminding yourself of all the other beautiful pieces that you are.
Yeah. And I notice a tendency for individuals with a disease to isolate. And I found something interesting based on observation only. I don't know how empirical it is, of people in the pandemic felt validated. They felt that the isolation they were feeling and experiences was now considered some type of normal. And did you notice similar things like that? You think there's any validity to that?
I do think that it normalized staying at home. It normalized pulling in. And so for a lot of people that were dealing with disease processes, for one time in their life, they got to kind of feel more like the norm than the not. Which is very validating. And it's like, okay, I'm not missing out on so many other activities that everybody else gets to do. Everybody's staying in. And now, I mean, look at all the things that came out of it, of Zoom groups, and being able to figure out how all of these support groups could create apps so that you could do them virtually. I mean, it really opened up a huge world for individuals with chronic illness or terminal illness that was not there prior to. So there was some good from it, but isolation is not good for us. I mean, what we know in the research is that higher rates of loneliness equals higher mortality rates. So, I mean, if you're lonely, the likelihood is that you'll die sooner. And understanding that connection and the importance of engaging with the world when you can, as you're able, with energy conservation and things like that, should be a huge part of the process of living with chronic illness.
And how important do you think meaningful connections are?
I mean, they're everything.
I agree.
What's living if you're not connecting? I think that's a huge reason. I feel like if you think evolution-wise, why loneliness is increased mortality is that we are creatures that need connection to survive. I mean, you create tribes. You had to put together communities to have food resources. I mean, obviously we're past that as a big piece of it, but evolutionary wise, that's why it started. We had to work together to live, or we're going to get killed by the lion or tiger or whatever's going on.
There's so much truth to that. In fact, in the 70s, Dr. Ernest Becker wrote a book called The Denial of Death, in which he was a student of Kierkegaard's work, and Otto Rank, who spent several decades with Sigmund Freud. And in that book, he said, in order to be something or someone, in order to be something, you had to be you have to be securely part of something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's important existentially. Do you think that micro connections are just as good as those larger connections? For example, I find that when I'm in the grocery store and I pay attention to my conduct, try to behave nobly, and I smile at the clerk and I wish her a good day, that type of micro connection to me is just as valuable as those big connections. And I think the micro connections contribute largely to meaningful connections. What do you think?
I definitely think they have a place. I don't know if they have like the same weight in the same circumstances, but they definitely have a spot on the shelf for why they're important. There was a research study recently about interacting with strangers and how people were thinking that, you know, that the interaction with the stranger wasn't going to be as meaningful. But then after they had the interaction, they had to rate how meaningful it was, and they rated it higher than what they expected.
Oh, nice.
So the research is there in that particular study showing that although we may not think that that stranger connection is as important as our other connections, there is some value to it that's improving our quality of life, that gives us some enjoyment. I also think there's a little bit less pressure in those moments. I mean, you could really say anything to the store clerk. I wouldn't suggest it, but you could say anything. So you can give your opinion a little bit more. You can be a little bit more outlandish if you wanted. You could say something that you normally wouldn't say that kind of lets you test the limits and be a little bit more playful. Maybe a connection that you have where there's a certain structure of how you interact. So I agree with that. And I think there's even research about the impact of just being at like a coffee shop and not interacting with anybody, but being around people that are talking, and how that improves quality of life rather than just being at home. So even if you are nervous or you don't want to talk to anybody, even getting yourself to a place where people are talking allows the brain to feel connected.
Lets you feel like you're part of something instead of just someone looking right in.
Exactly. I mean, you're in it. And I think, too, there's even research about interconnectivity, and the importance of that is if you can sit back and say, how am I connected to the world today in this moment? And you can think about so many pieces of that. You know, it's as small as being, I just did laundry, and that detergent was made somewhere by somebody who put together a bottle, who then made that machinery to be able to do that has supervisors that created a chemical to clean my clothes. And, you know, then you've got all of these connections and all of these people together working to clean your clothes and be connected to you and make you feel better. So if you can remind yourself of those tiny moments, it helps you feel connected.
You know, when I have to do my laundry, I don't think about that, just how this is going to take a minute.
I mean, it takes practice to remind yourself, like, how am I connected? But doing that is really important when you're feeling lonely, when you're not feeling connected to the world. Right.
I'll tell you a story. I was going through TikTok, you know, through all the Will Smith slaps and all the memes. And then there was this woman, and she told me to stay. And I'm like, okay, what am I buying into here? And then you a deep breath, and then you say some affirmation or something. I typically don't buy into what I think is wooey or woo-woo-ish. But in this case, I said, okay, I'm going to give this thing a try, okay? And so I did it, and I'm like, something cognitively happened. And I didn't know what it was. And so what's this little mini meditation you do on your TikTok? What's going on with somebody when they do that? What are the benefits?
Yeah. Well, meditation in general has so many. I mean, the research just keeps coming as to why it's important and why it's, you know, emotionally and physically important. It lowers blood pressure. It lowers depression, anxiety. It's even linked to reducing inflammation in the body in general. And if you know much about the inflammation system, is that there's the term cytokines, which has a linkage to cancer cells and increased cancer cells. So if there's a way to connect to reducing inflammation, the hypothesis is that that also would then in turn reduce the cancer cells from either growing or starting to grow or whatever the process may be. So the reasoning behind why I decided to do mini meditations is one, I mean, obviously TikTok, you have someone's attention, very small amount. So you're just needing a small moment. You only have so much time. And I think there's just some importance to remembering that the power of just one breath a day, even one deep breath a day, because deep breathing is very different than our shallow breathing system. It activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our relaxation system. It tells our body that we are safe, that we're calm, that we're present, and again, reduces our stress and muscle tensing. I mean, I'm even thinking about it. I'm already like calming down. So that's really the point of that. But the affirmation piece of that too is that learning how to create a mantra for yourself, whatever it is very important for our brain, because anything that we're telling it, it's downloading, it's trying to figure out what to do with that information. And if we veer to the negative too much, we have no balance. And for most people, they're veering to the negative too much. So those positive affirmations, those moments to say, I am safe, I am trustworthy, I am here, it creates that connection in the opposite direction so that your brain starts to fire that way rather than negatively.
Interesting. You think physical activity is good for people with disease?
Yes. I mean, that's another place. It's funny because I feel like I keep saying there's so much research that's coming out, and there really is. But I think before, even 10 years ago, we were so naive to the connection between the heart and the brain. Like, we were looking at these organisms as that they weren't like really, really, really connected. So if we are not being physically active, our brain is suffering. The oxygen is not going to be pumping there as much. The blood is not going to be pumping there as much. We're going to start to slow down. And also, there's just so many chemicals that make us feel good for our emotional state that happen from exercise. And I mean, it just should be a piece of everyone's routine to have some movement, even if it's just yoga, chair yoga, even. If you are limited physically, chair yoga, I think Tai Chi, there's options to be able to still move and engage without having to be so physically active, but still gaining something from that.
That movement is so therapeutic. Very therapeutic. And I noticed during my bodybuilding days when I was competing, I felt good. I was confident.
Exactly.
I was like, yeah, I'm conquered the world. I was younger, so I had probably more tea in my system. But I sent you some research on my particular disability. And what do you think about those? There's some comments in that research talking about how movement is a treatment for the condition. In what way do you think it's a treatment?
I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't go into the specifics of that. But I think, again, the connection between movement and how important it is to make our body feel like we are present and we are engaged. That's the whole point of living. I mean, when people sit still, that's when things go wrong. That's when the body shuts down. We are in the process of dying quickly. But if we are moving, we're engaging, we're building up our stamina, we're building up our energy level, we're reminding ourselves that we are part of this world. And I think that that's the key there.
Absolutely. I have some questions from you from some peers of mine.
All right.
Let's
see if I can answer them.
I run a Facebook group and sent about, I think 4 of them send some questions. Here's one I think is really important. He said, Dave, see if there's any way you can get over this. We touched on this a little bit, but if you can speak to it a little bit more. Getting invited out. I'm so excited to say yes. Then I start thinking, what shoes do I have? I can only wear a pair of wide New Balance shoes. Should I take my cane or my walker? Will I fall down? Then I make an excuse and stay home. How can I get over this?
Yeah, this comes up a lot. I think one piece of this is the outfit he's talking about. So I have a few people that have gotten stuck on the outfit. Like, what outfit am I going to choose? And so what I've suggested, what I've worked with people on is, let's take care of this outfit situation outside of the scenario. So put together this outfit that you want for different situations way ahead of time. You just have an outfit that is your dinner outfit. You just have an outfit to going to the park. And that way, when the situation comes up in your life where you're invited, you just have something to go to. Your brain says, I've already dealt with this problem. This problem is taken care of. I don't need to think about this. But the other pieces of that is, it's anxiety. It's anxiety of, am I going to fall? What happens then? And our brain is trying to create a problem before it even exists, because our brain, that's its entire job. It's to try to keep us safe.
To not die.
I know. It's a blessing and a curse, because even if we don't have a problem, our brain is like, where's the problem? I've got to fix whatever problem's coming, even if there is no problem. And so, the more times that you can remind yourself in that moment that I'm safe, I'm going to bring my cane, everything's going to work out. If it doesn't, worst case scenario, I fall, I'm with someone I trust, I'll take care of it at that point and just continue to go. Because the second that you stop going, the next time is going to be harder. There's going to be more anxiety, because there's an avoidance piece. The more we avoid, the larger the anxiety gets. And so you've got to burst that bubble, and you've got to keep bursting it and keep engaging, even when there's negative consequences of going. You have to remind yourself of how many times there are positive consequences.
Yeah, I think it's important to not disqualify the positive aspects.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here's another question. I'm afraid to date. I feel like I'm not good enough because of my disease. I'm smart, and I feel like I don't have any serious mental problems. How can I gain more confidence? And if I find a woman, at what point do I mention my disability?
I feel like when to mention things is such a personal choice. When do you feel like you want to divulge that information? And it also depends on how things have gone in the past when somebody has mentioned something. I think, from experience, the sooner the better is usually what I tell people. And to try to not make it as big of a deal, just it's part of the conversation. It's part of who you are, and you explain it briefly, and then you move on to kind of the next topic, or you see if they have any questions about it, but not trying to run too far away from it, because then it just builds up in your mind too. I mean, now I've got to wait till the next date when I bring it up, and what's that going to look like? And now we've gone on so many dates already. And I mean, your mind just starts to make up a whole story of how this person's going to react, and mind reading how they're going to react is only going to create more pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But how to date and how to gain more confidence is doing some inner work. I mean, I think reminding you, like you said, I am smart. I mean, remembering all of these other pieces of you, because you aren't just an illness, and we all have things. We all have pieces of us, that are part of our story, but we can spin those pieces. I have a chronic illness, and it's taught me how strong I am. I have a chronic illness, and it's taught me how adaptable I am. I mean, people love people that can adapt. Everybody wants to date somebody that if something goes wrong, they don't fall apart. I mean, there's so much strength to that story, but it's about remembering those pieces of that strength.
That's an awesome perspective.
And pulling those out of you, and figuring out how you are the storyteller. So if you're on a date, you're controlling that narrative.
Excellent.
So you can either
Great
be the hero
answer.
or the victim in your own story that you just made.
Exactly.
Here's another one. How do I build a medical team? I feel like they don't want me to exercise. I'm afraid to stick up for myself because I think they know more than me. I just want them to listen to me. I'm overweight and I don't feel like nobody cares. I need to do something.
It's a tough scenario to be in. I think understanding how to be an advocate in a medical appointment is a whole other ballgame than being an advocate in your day-to-day world, because there is that mentality that these people know more. They if they say something, I don't know if I can, say something back. Maybe I get scared once I'm there, and I had all these questions, and now I've completely blocked everything out because I'm so anxious ridden. So there's a few things that you can do. Some people will bring someone in their family or their network that has medical expertise to their appointments to help advocate with them. And that solves a lot of things for people. Some people will have like a case manager or a social worker. They'll try to get a social worker on their side, and you could always start with that as well. And then the social worker can sometimes come with you to an appointment or sit in. Especially with things being virtual, that option is becoming even more accessible for like a therapist to sit in. If you had a mental health therapist or social worker or somebody in your family that has medical expertise, these people can sit in on the appointment with you and they can help you advocate for that. Another piece is writing down all your questions before you go into a medical appointment and literally just handing them the notebook. That way they have to answer everything. You can even record it on your phone. You can ask them if you can record the session on the phone so that you can remember everything and take it all in, because you might be too anxious during the appointment. But I think understanding that you know yourself better than anyone else. So even if all of these experts are experts on the disease, they are not experts on you. And you have to hold on to that piece. I think you just really have to believe that you have some importance in that meeting.
Absolutely. Last question. Hi, Dr. Maxwell. I think I'm ready to exercise. Dave and John are really good at telling us the benefits of exercise, and they're really motivating and inspiring. I'm afraid, though. Why do I feel so afraid?
Well, I don't know him specifically, so I'm sure there's lots of pieces to that puzzle, because it's incredibly complex as to why somebody might be worried about exercising. I think a piece, if you haven't exercised in a while, and what I would assume maybe a thought that's popping up is how is this going to potentially negatively impact my disease process?
Right.
Or maybe I'm not going to be able to be consistent with this, something along those lines, or fear that I may fall or I may cause injury and make things worse. So my advice would be to get a personal trainer because somebody that, or a physical therapist, and starting there with a specialist, having them do some research about what, is good for the disease process, what's not, and coming up with a plan. And that person will then hold you accountable to doing the engagement. So that's the other piece, is how do you create consistency? And for people that are just starting off with exercise, having somebody that's going to kind of be there for you, be your cheerleader, and show up and push you to engage keeps you on that path to do so.
Well, thank you, Dr. Maxwell, for talking with us today. And if somebody wanted to get a hold of you to consult with you or take advantage of your services, where can they find you?
So I think the easiest way would be through the social media accounts I have on Instagram or TikTok, which is Positive Mind Mediator, all one word. And then I also, if somebody's wanting psychotherapy, I do take individual clients, but I'm only licensed in California specifically. So, but I do my sessions through Zoom for individuals that maybe are physically limited. And that can be found on psychologytoday.com as well. And for anybody that's wanting a mental health provider, that's really the website that I tell people to go to if they're trying to find a therapist or a psychologist, is psychologytoday.com, because it's usually the most up-to-date. And you can filter by insurance, you can filter by gender, by people that specialize with chronic illness is even something you can click to filter by. And also, because we're living in a world of Zoom, the accessibility to find a provider that fits you is there, because you don't have to just see somebody that's down the street anymore. You can see anybody in an entire state. So you could see somebody that's a specialist that's in one of the larger cities, if you're in a rural area, that maybe knows more because they're having better access to a larger population.
Okay. And I'll go ahead and put those links in the notes for our listeners. Appreciate you talking with us today. Very nice.
You're welcome.
Nice
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.